Welcome back to this, our closing session of Innovate for Climate 2021. Now, over the course of these 3 days, we've been privy to some really incredible observations and inspiring high-level speakers, all sharing their thoughts and expertise about climate action. We're going to hear from Juergen Voegele, World Bank's Vice President of Sustainable Development, and we're going to reflect on the last 3 days and hopefully take some of the questions that you've been sending in over the course of this event. Juergen, thank you so much for being with us. Before I pose some of those audience questions to you, what are your thoughts about what we've heard this week? And I know it's hard to pick a single highlight, but I'm going to push you to do that.
Well, thank you, Anita, and thank you so much for your brilliant hosting of the I4C. What a fantastic 3 days it's been. And I say this despite the difficult year it has been, and knowing that we've missed seeing you all in person and having great face-to-face conversations. But despite that, and maybe because of it, we are thrilled that over 8,000 people registered, tuned in for the plenaries, and engaged in the workshops. So I'm really amazed the energy and enthusiasm we've seen over the last 3 days to talk about real solutions and innovations, not just ideas, but the real action stuff, to get into the nuts and bolts of climate policy, markets, and technologies, and to really think about how to deliver climate action that is inclusive, that's resilient, and it's sustainable. So I thoroughly enjoyed the 3 plenaries, headlining each day, hearing from leaders from government, business, finance, global institutions, sharing their thoughts on climate-smart solutions. Those will be really vital in ensuring a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, if you allow me, Anita, maybe 2 points stand out for me. First, a conversation between Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, and our World Bank Group President, David Malpass, and they were getting really into the economic case for climate action. They talked about realigning incentives towards sustainability in the financial sector, huge challenge, and the need to work with countries to align their policies and resources towards climate action. And then they discussed the perspectives of climate risk as an investment risk. I think once that is really DNA'd into the system, a lot of things will change for the better. And there are discussions about new technologies, the new markets and low carbon opportunities out there, of which there are plenty as we're learning every day. And secondly, maybe the conversation on day 2 about net zero and how countries are thinking about it, how they're planning for it, and how they intend to achieve it. What's most critical here will be speed and scale, how we work together to unlock finance and maximizing impact in an inclusive way that really leaves no one behind. We heard a lot about this topic in both the plenaries and the workshops. Net zero targets have been gaining a lot of momentum globally, and carbon pricing could, of course, and has to play a key role. I was also struck by the awareness of the need to be politically sensitive, taking into account broad stakeholder engagement, managing the distributional aspects well, thinking about equity and fairness, and really effectively communicating to people what this is all about. If people are not with it, no matter how smart your policy or how enlightened your investment ideas are, if people are not behind it and with it, it won't work. And I think that came out very strongly in those 2 days. So in general, I was really impressed by all these concrete ideas brought about by an amazing set of experts participating in this event. I also wanted to say that I've been impressed by the quality, depth, and participation throughout the event. Innovate for Climate hosted over 70 workshops. This was our highest number ever. We've not been doing this for 5 years, with experts and practitioners from around the world sharing their insights and all these innovations that I've just mentioned. We've also hosted a virtual marketplace and saw some very exciting exchanges of ideas and best practice. So Anita, my hope is that everyone goes away from this summit thinking about how they can apply what they've heard, and so that we can collectively put our minds to delivering a low carbon, a resilient, and a just future.
Juergen, thank you so much. I mean, there is so much to think about. You're absolutely right. It is now, though, your turn. Thank you so much for engaging as enthusiastically as you have. We've had so many questions over the last few days, so I've picked out a few of the most popular, and hopefully, Juergen, if you're game, you're going to try and answer some of these for us now. So firstly, the World Bank has been working on climate for a long time now. Even so, the climate crisis is getting more and more challenging, and we're seeing more climate impacts on a regular basis. So how is the World Bank stepping up support?
Well, Anita, you're absolutely right to say that addressing the climate crisis is becoming more and more urgent. As we know, we are heading towards 1.5 degrees. Just in today's news, we may be having the first year within the next 5 years where the planet is warmed 1.5 degrees. So it's really urgent, and we really need to go to scale. But we are seeing more opportunities now to address this challenge than we ever have seen, because as technology evolves, as policies get better, as there's a much stronger coherence and alliance around the world to try to tackle this, we absolutely see more opportunity. And at the World Bank, our role as a leader in climate change is also becoming clearer than ever. We're seeing more and more evidence about how climate change and development are fundamentally linked. You cannot have development without dealing with climate change that is truly sustainable. So it's no longer possible to think that we can eliminate poverty and boost shared prosperity, which is sort of the World Bank Group's mandate, without simultaneously addressing the climate crisis. That means if we want to reach the goals that we have set ourselves, we must lead on climate, not follow. On the other hand, we also see clearly the new economic opportunities and jobs that can come about from low carbon, resilient investments in countries at all stages of development. We think that we can address the climate crisis in a way that ultimately brings better results for people, for the planet, and for the economies. There is there's not always this notion that everything has to be a trade-off. There will be some, but there is huge opportunity out there. And I think we're beginning to unlock this now very rapidly. Over the last 5 years, just to talk you through a little bit what the World Bank is planning to do, what we have been doing, what we are planning to do. For the last 5 years, we delivered around $83 billion to climate-related investments, which makes us the largest among a broad group of financial supporters in this space, with projects in renewable energy, huge solar, huge wind investments, public transport, coastal resilience, and more sustainable agriculture and land use and landscape practices. But we can do more. So here are some of the ways we're stepping up. So let me share this with you. Together with our partners, governments, private sector, other MDBs, and the wider development community. First, we will be more ambitious in terms of our own direct climate finance. We are now committing to making 35% of our lending going forward over the next 5 years to support climate action directly for our clients. This is a big step up from where we were over the past 5 years. One of the comments we received actually from Peter out of London was about whether countries are doing enough on climate, whether the NDCs add up. And I would say countries are doing a lot, but much more is also possible. And time is running out. We all know that the current set of NDCs will not keep us within a 1.5 degree world. In fact, it will get us closer to a catastrophic 3-degree world. So we really need to ramp up. And this is something we, together with many of the partners around the world, will continue to do, work with governments on those kinds of questions. We're thinking about transformational policy of financial support rather than one-off interventions. It makes a big difference if you can change a policy that enables renewable energy rather than just financing a renewable energy project itself. We will do both, but we will try to get more upstream. Second, we are boosting our finance for climate adaptation. As we've already said, we're close to a 1.5 degree world. Climate change is happening to hundreds of millions of people around the world on a daily basis. More droughts, more floods, more storms, more heavy precipitation. All these things are happening as we speak. And we really believe we need to focus, yes, on mitigation, but equally on adaptation. So 50% of what we're going to finance going forward will be on protecting coastal erosion, restoring wetlands and mangroves, as we're doing in 6 West African countries, restoring resilience in many countries, working with poorest countries, with small island developing states to help them with their fragility, conflict, and violence, which is triggered by these increasing weather events, etc. So the focus on adaptation will be very strong, and we will try to maintain a 50% target on this. And third, we are making sure that we put people at the heart of our climate work. You cannot have good climate policy that doesn't put people and communities at the center, as I said in the beginning. For us, this means working through the tough questions around the just transition. It means investing in jobs and skills, investing in social protection systems and in good human capital outcomes, so that you really have development that works for people and for the planet. It also means involving people as central decision makers, making sure that they are involved in designing and implementing climate smart policies in their countries. I cannot overemphasize, if we want to be successful in the quantum change that we all need, it has to be with the people and through the people.
I mean, you make such a convincing argument for the urgency of this. However, there are so many countries who are struggling right now, grappling with COVID-19. How can they step up as well?
Well, absolutely, right? So we live in a triple crisis world at the moment, and we are taking fast and comprehensive action at the World Bank to save lives, protect the poor and vulnerable, achieve sustainable growth, and rebuild in better ways. We financed more than $108 billion to respond to the COVID between April of last year and March this year, which is an absolute record for the institution. It's 65% more than what we've done in the previous year, because quite frankly, for many countries, of course, the pandemic is still ongoing. It's getting better in a few, but it's still we're still in the middle of this. and it's posing clear and immediate challenges to everybody there. At the same time, COVID has also made pre-existing issues more evident. It has highlighted that inequalities in society that we knew were there, but had made the extent of these, it made the extent of these inequalities much more clear. So COVID-19 has also shown us the need to work on prevention of pandemic and disasters so that we can avoid some of the hardest consequences of these crises in the future. And the economic and fiscal crisis brought about by COVID-19 have also shown that we need to rethink how we use these resources, right? So we're spending a lot of time and have a lot of internal conversations, how we can really emphasize focus on climate smart development, while at the same time making sure that every dollar that is spent is used with multiple outcomes, with multiple positive outcomes, right? While countries are rethinking their use of their resources, we now have really great opportunities to make sure that whatever is spent is more green, it is more resilient, and it is more inclusive. Not only the longer term perspective, but you can also unlock short-term gains, jobs, and economic growth. Take, for instance, adaptation and resilience, as I mentioned earlier. But for the world's poorest countries, they are facing the worst impacts of climate change. Right? We need to invest in building the resilience of these people and communities, whether through climate-sensitive disease surveillance systems or through adaptive social protection systems, a broad range of topics where we will really step up and where we are already stepping up. So similarly, if you're right now working in a government ministry tasked with thinking about a recovery from the pandemic, you should know that green recovery strategies will not just unlock climate or sustainability benefits, but they can also unlock jobs and lucrative careers for citizens. They can improve the quality of life. Look at how the quality of life improved with lower emissions in terms of air quality impact in many of the world's cities. And you're building more economic resilience. So this is exactly the kind of analytical expertise that we're providing to our clients to help guide their recovery decisions, helping them see that these are not competing priorities, that they rather they complement each other. You know, I often feel there is a conversation out there that says, oh, well, yes, we should be doing X, Y, and Z, but there's always a trade-off. From my perspective, not doing those things, not linking the climate focus, not linking the green, the resilient, and the inclusive agenda with your economic growth agenda is the trade-off. Back to you, Anita.
Well, on that, I mean, you're talking about certain kinds of investments and policy options that can support, you know, in your words, green, resilient, inclusive development. Just looking back on the last 3 days, what were the solutions that were most exciting, in your opinion?
Well, now you're asking a tough question. There's so much exciting, so many exciting ideas were discussed and put on the table. So in terms of policies, I was definitely really happy to see the latest update on the carbon pricing, right? The focus on carbon pricing. We just issued a report. Even though the overall prices remain quite low globally, this is clearly an instrument that is growing in application. We now have over 20% of global greenhouse gases covered by some sort of carbon pricing instrument. That's a very positive sign. And that the revenues generated are, you know, upwards of $53 billion, which is about 17% more than what we had last year. Let me also respond to a comment from Brenda from Kenya that came in over our chat on Tuesday. Carbon pricing is not just a policy for developed economies. In fact, many developing countries already have some kind of carbon pricing policy in place, but it may not always be totally explicit and not really obvious to the outsider. We have been actively supporting over 20 emerging economies in developing countries to increase their readiness and implementation of carbon pricing instruments over the last 10 years. We have a program that's called a Partnership for Market Readiness, and we're ramping up efforts through its successor program to get them ready for implementation. And through the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, we are bringing together governments and private sector, including in IDA countries, to get a better understanding of how carbon pricing works. There is still a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of myth out there, and people are still often stuck in a situation 15 years ago when this instrument did not really work very well yet. But let's be clear, this is the future. This will happen, and it has a momentum and a dynamic right now that we are feeling strongly is building. In terms of technology, it was great to see how low carbon solutions are being applied in different sectors. We had a participant from Sri Lanka, Ruwan, who pointed out in his message to us, it's really important to think about the nature-based solutions. And I couldn't agree more. When you think of technology, or when most people think of technology, a lot of attention gets paid to energy and transport, but it's also important to look at the green solutions. So it was really great to see that there were sessions on agriculture, from new tools and technologies that are improving access to weather information, to standardizing efforts in sequestering soil carbon, for instance, which is a huge potentially new asset class out there. And I think we're getting very close now to figuring out what it takes in terms of monitoring and getting the data to actually solidify that argument. And how better data is supporting, for instance, agriculture performance in Kenya was another really interesting session. So my own background is in agriculture, and I'm very passionate about technology that can be applied to improve opportunities for farmers and communities, but a technology that at the same time also really works for the environment, for biodiversity, for climate change resilience and mitigation, and so broadly works for the environment and the planet. And then finally, on finance, I think there are a lot of interesting conversations, so many elements to pick up in the last 3 days. Everything from Larry Fink, I already mentioned in the opening session about mentioning long-term patient capital that's available to finance low-carbon investments, to Axel and Tanya in today's plenary session, talking about how finance for public, private, and concessional sources can work together. The 2 workshop sessions that looked at how really get it flowing at scale, how do you really scale up in a meaningful way? So I'm left with a very strong positive sense that governments, business participants from around the world, we're all aware of not just the crisis, but we're actively part of the solution.
Yeah, well, let's hope that this is the start of many conversations and also blueprints for action in the near future. Thank you very much, Juergen. That's all we've got time for just for now. And thank you for taking the time to answer what I'm sure you'll agree have been really interesting, very interesting, challenging questions. Do stay with us, though, because in a moment we're going to be taking a look at the highlights of Innovate for Climate 2021. But before we do that, we've got some very exciting news about next year. I'm joined by a very special guest who's going to tell us what we might be able to look forward to post-pandemic. Please welcome Donna Valvanera, Ulargui, Aparicio, Spain's Director General of the Climate Change Office, Ministry of Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. Thank you very much for being with us, Valvanera. It's over to you.
Thank you very much, Anita, and it is a pleasure being with all of you in this closing session in such a special edition in both form and substance. 2020 was a very difficult year, but 2021 is the year that we are shaping up the recovery in which climate ambition, innovation, resilience are ingredients that are more required than ever. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate my dear friends of the World Bank. This year's organization has been a challenge, but the results could not be more positive, as Juergen has already picked it up. I think that have the opportunity to meet again, to share experience, and to learn together, it is very, very, very important. I4C is fit for purpose, and I think, and I am convinced that it's more needed than ever. On the future, optimism must be the benchmark. We need to continue working on innovation, on new technologies, on climate smart solutions, and on new green financing formulas. And with all this in mind, I have, and it is my pleasure to announce the date of the next edition, which we hope we will be held in person from 24 to 26 May in the city of Barcelona. I look forward to seeing you all in Spain. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Valvanera. That's really exciting news, and I'm sure we're really looking forward to attending real live events again and being able to network with each other, especially in the beautiful surroundings of Barcelona. Let's come back to you, Juergen. What message do you hope our audience is going to leave with after this event?
Thank you, Anita, and thank you, Valvanera. It's so wonderful to hear that Innovate for Climate will hopefully in person next year, and hopefully be in person next year. And I really look forward to seeing many of you in Barcelona, of course, one of my favorite cities. Of course, while Innovate for Climate provides a key moment in the calendar to discuss climate innovations in finance, markets, policy, and technology, it is important. It's absolutely essential, actually, that we keep up the dialogue all year round. We cannot just go from event to event. We have to keep this momentum up as we speak. As we heard from our speakers over the course of Innovate for Climate, net zero targets aren't enough to deliver on the Paris Agreement. We also need short-term and medium-term action to move us forward. So although we are saying goodbye for now, we are looking forward to keeping in touch over the coming weeks and months with you and to work with you as we deliver solutions for the people and the planet. So thank you all to our participants, from the business blazing a trail of innovative solutions to the investors financing the work, to the policymakers setting targets and sending bold signals about the direction of travel. Thank you all for participating and taking part in Innovate for Climate 2021.
And thank you once again for being with us over the last 3 days and for joining the conversation at Innovate for Climate 2021. Thank you to all of our sponsors. And do remember, if you've missed any of the panel sessions or you'd like to view them again, all of the plenaries are going to be available to watch on demand on the I4C event website for the next 90 days. And who knows? Maybe I'll see you in beautiful Barcelona. But for now, let's take a look at the highlights of I4C 2021. Welcome to Innovate for Climate 2021. David, it's over to you.
Our collective responses to climate change, poverty, and inequality are defining choices of our age.
There is more capital that's willing to put money to work in renewables and decarbonization than there are available projects.
Altogether, there's a great deal of excitement among WTO members as to how we can contribute and how trade can contribute to lowering carbon emissions.
At the end, it's a kind of insurance. We cannot expect the returns in our investments if we are building in a place where the adaptation, the resilience to the climate impacts has not been taken into consideration.
We need to have courageous leadership.
Getting our population to understand the importance of climate change and climate-smart innovations.
It is only by working collaboratively that we can achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement.